Hello fellow YouTubers, my name is Adrian.exe. Welcome to the very first episode of a series called Content Analysis, where I take viewer suggestions on different topics and analyze them. Since this is my very first episode and I haven't received prior suggestions, I'd like to start this off by analyzing a video game character shrouded in mystery, Chara from Undertale. Chara was the very first human to fall into the underground and taken in by the Dreamer family. After establishing a life in the underground, Chara falls ill due to being poisoned by buttercups. Asriel, Asgore and Toriel's biological son, then agrees to fuse souls with Chara after he/she passes due to the poisoning. Asriel carries Chara to fulfill his/her dying wish to once again view the golden flowers of his/her home village. When they arrive, humans believe that Asriel was responsible for Chara's death. Although Chara wanted to destroy the humans at the time, Asriel resisted the temptation and instead took the brunt of their assault, which led to his death. In the fourth True Lab tape accessed during the True Pacifist route, Asriel says, "Yeah, we'll be strong, we'll free everyone." And in the fifth tape, he states the following: 6, right? We just have to get 6? In the Genocide route, Flowey tells Chara that they should finish what they started and free everyone. Flowey, a soulless version of Asriel, states, "Then let's let them see what humanity is really like. That despite it all, this world is still kill or be killed." Asriel tells the protagonist, Frisk, that he came up with this philosophy because his resistance to Chara led them both to be killed. At the end of the Genocide route, Chara briefly mentions Asriel's resistance to his/her plan. At first, I was so confused. Our plan had failed, hadn't it? Asriel and Chara formulate a plan to gather 6 souls, presumably from the outside world. Asriel, in the form of Flowey, adopts Chara's views on humanity. Although it can be assumed Chara's plan was to destroy humanity, it seems that Asriel's plan was instead to expose humanity for what they are, and demonstrate to the rest of the monsters that humans are driven by self-preservation, selfishness, and a need to obtain power. As the player traverses the Genocide route, several characters comment on the appearance of the player. Sans comments to Frisk that it would be great if the protagonist continued pretending to be a human, while Asgore asks what kind of monster the protagonist is. At the end of the Genocide route, which is the only time you actually see Chara, aside from Easter eggs, we are told by Chara that the cause of their reincarnation was in fact the player's determination and human soul. But what shaped Chara's purpose were the merciless killings of the monsters. Chara states that he is the gratification that the player feels when leveling up his stats. He/she states that the player is plagued by a perverted sentimentality if the Genocide route is completed once again. The player needs to give up Frisk's soul in order to recreate the world following the first playthrough of the Genocide route. Now, before going any further, it's important to explain that this video is in no way intended to explain whether Chara is or is not inherently evil. Instead, it will attempt to explain what he represents in-game in terms of psychology before and after the Genocide route is completed. At first glance, it appears Chara is just an impressionable child whose moral identity is fully developed by the choices made by the player. Although it may seem that Chara may have already hated humanity, it is entirely possible that his hate may have been justifiable depending on his/her upbringing or accompanying childhood trauma. It could be argued that the psychopathic version of Chara is brought about due to the lack of impulse control, the Zeigarnik effect, and predominant volition experienced by the player during or after their playthrough. The Zeigarnik effect states that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed tasks. Predominant volition is when we decide to make a choice, and that choice governs a series of actions. The Zeigarnik effect and the lack of impulse control can be experienced by the player either during or after their initial playthrough. These two concepts entice the player to either go through the pacifist route or the Genocide route, depending upon their preference. The fact is that we are all probably curious or have the impulse during our playthrough to conduct ourselves in-game the way we would, usually, in an RPG, meaning defeating every enemy we can to level up. However, it is the player's predominant volition that governs the player after a committed decision is made. Regardless of the cause to pursue the Genocide route, it is my opinion that Chara represents how our choices affect our human psyche, and as the Genocide route demonstrates, how those same choices can deprive us of basic human morality. As the player is drawn to kill every monster in the underground, he gives in to his evil impulses, and that in turn begins to shape Chara's morals. Acting without empathy and without regard to the consequences of one's actions causes a shift in Chara's point of view. He becomes a destructive, apathetic villain to anyone living in their world. Chara represents how our actions could have lasting consequences, and how those consequences forever change the world around us. With regard to psychology, he/she represents what happens when we deprive ourselves of morality, are power hungry, seek our own gratification in exchange for our humanity, and let our morbid curiosity get the best of us. Some of the real-world examples of what could happen if we give in to these evil impulses can be seen in two of the most notable social psychological experiments: the Stanley Milgram obedience experiment and the Philp Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment. In the Milgram experiment, an experimenter and a volunteer, posed as a teacher, would sit in a room together. The experimenter would then signal the teacher to administer a shock to an actor posed as a student in another room, under the guise that the student incorrectly matched a set of words. The study measured the teacher's willingness to obey an authority figure who instructed them to act against their own personal set of ethics. The shocks were fabricated, and the actor simply reacted to the shocks as if they were real. Exactly 65% of the teachers administered the final 450-volt shock, which could have been fatal had they been real shocks. All teachers administered at least a 300-volt shock to the learners. Milgram concluded that situational factors, or the construction of social contexts in which evil is allowed to take place, is primarily the reason behind evil actions. It seems that we are bound psychologically to strive to appear competent, remain dutiful, and absolve ourselves of moral responsibility through shifting the blame to the authority figures in our lives, as well as our circumstances. And the Stanford prison experiment, a basement of the university was used to establish a makeshift prison in order to study the effects of imprisonment and the mentality between prisoners and the corrections staff. A total of 24 men were randomly assigned the role of prisoner or guard. The findings of the experiment were shocking to say the least. Guards beat inmates, had them sleep on concrete floors, stripped them, harassed them, as well as placing one inmate in solitary confinement. These two experiments show us that given the right circumstances, people will occasionally give in to authority figures and abandon their morality to conform to their environment. So what is it that we are seeking to gratify? What needs are we trying to meet? A sense of omnipotence or control? Who is the authority figure? For the player, gratification may stem from receiving a sense of empowerment, or to escape and feel a sense of freedom from the repressive norms of the game. We are the authoritative figure in this case, as no one else decides what choices we make in-game until the very end of the genocide route. Although it can be argued that Chara does somewhat represent an authority figure due to him/her taking control during some sequences of the game. This can also be viewed from a philosophical perspective. In Immanuel Kant's theory on evil, greed and selfishness are viewed as manageable risk factors. Could it be that the player merely chose to take these risks? Or should we view these choices as an inability of one's moral character to prevail due to biological, psychological, or environmental factors? A psychological perspective can be taken if we take a look at Bad Men Do What Good Men Dream by Robert I. Simon, in which he states that everyone experiences negative impulses stemming from aggression, hostility, and sadism. The difference is in the degree and the ability to exercise restraint. Chara represents the feeling of instant gratification and demonstrates to the player that their natural impulses and instincts to excel, as in most RPGs, has lasting consequences. Leveling up is a form of positive reinforcement, and instant gratification often accompanies defeating one's enemies. Another form of gratification that the player may experience is completing the game at a much faster pace. This can be seen in speedrun data. The fastest someone has completed the pacifist route is 1 hour and 26 minutes, versus the genocide route, which can be completed at around 1 hour and 5 minutes. It's apparent by these speedrun times that the gratification of completing the game quickly and overcoming difficult circumstances can be achieved by choosing the genocide route. With regard to those lasting consequences, anyone who has completed the pacifist route after the genocide route can tell you what happens. At the end, we are given a cutscene demonstrating that Chara is still an acting force inhabiting Frisk's body, and are even shown a defiled picture of his friends, with Frisk being replaced by Chara. In conclusion, it appears Chara represents our need to complete a daunting task for the satisfaction that video games, mainly RPGs, provide to our emotional needs. That's not to say that we are inherently evil for completing this route. We may just be curious and want to challenge ourselves by completing a more difficult route. It could be that we are simply reacting with the learned behavior reinforced by RPGs and acting in self-defense when attacked. Or it could be that we are willing to give up our morality in-game to pursue our morbid curiosity. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below, and feel free to leave suggestions for the next content analysis episode. It does not have to be related to video games, and please like, favorite, and subscribe for more content. Thanks.